Hello, everyone. I'm Gemma Star, and welcome to a very special episode of Heart Warriors. Heart Warriors is a series I've been guided and inspired to do thanks to my energetic connection with Kata Judah. Kata Judah being our beautiful sacred masculine side in Central Australia, very close to Uluru, our sacred feminine side. So what I'm here to do is to interview 100 men and find out all about their journey into the heart, their highs, their lows, tools, practices, insights, wisdom, what worked for them to get them out of their deepest, darkest moment and shining into the beautiful heart warriors that they are today. Today's guest is a very special man called Dellacóma Rio. Now, Dellacóma is a vocalist, a poet, an actor, father, and husband, but he's also the frontman for the Australian INXS Show and a very well-respected singer, songwriter, and performer under his own name. So really excited to be chatting with Dell today and finding all about his journey into the heart. Enjoy. Hello, Dellacóma Rio. What a pleasure to have you here. How are you today?
I'm doing quite fine. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. And we were just chatting before the show, and Dell is home in Queensland, which is quite close to where I live too in Queensland. So great to see you there outdoors enjoying the winter sunshine.
Yeah, I thought we've got a bit of building going on the property here. So there's on the other side, there's a lot of tradies making a lot of noise. So I thought I'd bring us outside for the interview.
Perfect. That's so good. Nice and grounded there. All right, let's find out about the man you are inside Dell. I always like to ask, when you drop all your labels and you've built up quite a lot of accolades there with your career in as a vocalist, musician, and you're also father, husband. But who is the man inside when you drop all those external labels?
Good question. I'll bring it back, I guess. I mean, it's perfect for the title of the show, but the heart of it, is my first three tattoos, I think, explain quite well where my heart is. My first tattoo was over my heart, and it's the name of the first name that the Hebrew God gave himself, I believe to be the creator. And it says Yahweh, which is the Hebrew words for breath. So it's inhale, exhale. And it's written backwards on my heart to indicate God on the inside, writing his name on my heart. It's encased in the ichthus fish to symbolize God working through religion, but it's also broken down to remind me that no matter how much religion breaks down, God is always there. Moving towards my left side to symbolize God working through my weakness. My second tattoo was on my right wrist, which is the word love. And I'm right-handed, so it's the idea that everything that I do with my hands, I want to be motivated by love. And then across my shoulders, I have the tattoo of freedom. And those are, I also have truth across my shoulder as well in later years. But I think when you boil everything down, for me personally, I just want to be the best that I can be. I fully, and I know that sounds a bit blasé, but I fully believe that everyone has been created individually for a reason and for a purpose, and we've been made different for a reason and for a purpose. And we've got skills and talents that might be similar to one another, but there's only ever going to be one you. And your yardstick, if you will, as to how you measure that is really internal, because nobody knows whether you're giving your best or not. You could be working so hard for 40 years and not show any exterior progress, or you could not really be trying a whole lot and show progress, but only you know that. And I think from a physical standpoint, integrating the spiritual life here on earth um, I think it has to come back to you knowing yourself and knowing when you were giving your best, because when you're giving your best, then that's all that can be asked. And you know when you're not giving your best, and when you're not giving your best, there's room for improvement. To boil me down, who I am underneath the layers is a man who wants to be honest, um, and who wants to be truly free. And when I say truly free, I mean free of addictions, free of unconscious habits, free of uh, thought patterns that I didn't choose. That to me is true freedom. Being able to be in a space where you're in control of not necessarily what's going through your head, because I don't believe that you can always control the thoughts that come into your head, but you can control the thoughts that you choose to stay with, if that makes sense.
Oh, this is brilliant. This is going to be a great conversation. Just this insight into you, is brilliant. So let's expand on this while we're on this subject. I'm fascinated with these thoughts that, come into our head and what we choose to keep in our head. Because this is, I found, a big part of our healing journey, the thoughts in our head. So when did you first become aware of this sort of, we can control what thoughts are running through our head and the importance of the internal narrative? And what tips have you got for men to step into this awareness and the importance of it?
Um, I My childhood was when I first sort of discovered it, but I don't think I didn't understand what I was discovering. I used to have a recurring nightmare, as often kids do, and I decided that I wanted to, the way in my head when I probably would have been 9 or 10. Um, I thought, well, if I start off, if I think about something I want to dream about while I'm going to sleep, hopefully I'll start dreaming about that instead of dreaming about these other things that are bad, right? So what I used to do is, and later I've found out that I was learning yoga techniques and breath work and all that, but I didn't understand that at the time. What I would do is I would think about Ninja Turtles, for instance, and I'd be like, all right, I want to do a Ninja Turtle movie in my head, but I want to be in the movie. So I would close my eyes and create, the movie that I knew in real, that I'd seen, and put myself in there. And then as I was doing that, I would slowly put my body to sleep. So I'd focus on my toes till my toes were asleep, and then move up to my calves. And it worked. And so from that age of about 9 or 10, that became my way of putting myself to sleep. Years later, going through a divorce, I found myself in a very difficult internal situation, as I think most divorces are. I don't think anybody truly wants to get divorced. People want to remove themselves from conflict, and people want to get into a better situation. But I don't think anybody truly wants to be divorced. And I remember having thoughts in my head of just not wanting to be here anymore. It wasn't suicidal thoughts, but it was the amount of pain that I was experiencing internally, it felt too much. And the thoughts that would come in would be that I just don't want to be here anymore. And I'm quite an analytical person. So I unpacked that and was like, well, that doesn't make sense to me, because I have to be here and I can't not be here. But then my mind would say, well, you don't have to be here. That's a choice. And so then I'd unpack that further and go, well, yes, but I'm choosing to be here. And that kind of, I guess that probably would have been, it wasn't that long ago. It was probably 4 years, I guess, 4 or 5 years, of really identifying thoughts as visitors, I guess, if you will. I wrote a song on my last album called Stay. And it paints the picture of someone coming over for tea, and the chorus says, "If you're going to stay, I will make some tea." Um, um, and the idea that thoughts are, they're visitors and they knock on your door, and you can either ignore them, or you can open the door and acknowledge them, but then say, this is my space, you're not entering in. Or you can invite them in, and if you invite them in, you can either invite them in for tea, you can invite them in for a meal, or you can invite them to stay. And that is, now I'm of the belief that that's what we need to do with thoughts, is we need to actively choose the ones that get to actually live in our head, in the same way that if we're in a share house, or you're living, even if you're not in a share house, if you're living in a home, if somebody just walks in the front door, you have no idea who they are, you're not going to say, well, okay, I guess you live here now. You ask them questions as to who they are, and unpack all of that. But we don't do that with thoughts, and I think it's because we, at a subconscious level, we just kind of assume that the thoughts are part of us. But that's a whole other conversation as to whether that's true or not. But my belief is that thoughts, you can choose to put thoughts in your mind. Thoughts can be put into your mind from other people, and sometimes I do believe that there are spiritual beings that can nudge thoughts into our headspace, for either good or bad reasons. But ultimately, we get to choose whether they stay or not. And as far as tips go, it's hard process, but just trying. I've found discipline, which is something I'm working very hard at. It's not something that comes naturally, I don't think, to many people. But even just something as simple as just writing the word, focus on your thoughts, and putting that on a sticky note on your wall, or writing it on a whiteboard. That allows you to see those words, and then later on through the day, hopefully that you remember them. Something that I've got written on my whiteboard as well, at the moment, is I will pause before I speak, or sorry, I will pause before I respond. And that's just to remind myself that my response to anything needs to be chosen. It shouldn't just be reactionary. Even the good things, they should be chosen. We want to be operating out of a freedom. Obviously, you don't want to think that you're controlled and everything you do is controlled. But I do think that there's a level where you need to train your reactions, and you need to train your emotions to be a servant of who you truly are, because otherwise you're going to be guided by what's around you, and you're going to be guided by how other people impact your space, if that makes sense.
Definitely. No, beautiful awareness. Thank you, Dell. Let's get into your childhood, and we'll work up now to see how you became the man you are today. What would you say was your major challenge that you had to overcome growing up?
Believe it or not, probably shyness. I was raised eldest of 5 kids, homeschooled, in a very small church in Tasmania. And I struggled a little bit in crowds or in large groups of people that I didn't know, because it was very foreign to me. My days were spent with my family, and the church that I grew up in was maybe 12 people. I'd go, like, sometimes we'd have homeschooling meetings, or I joined scouts when I was 11 or 12. But aside from that, I wasn't around large groups of people every day like you often are when you go to school. So I did struggle with that, making the transition into university. And I think, looking back now, a big struggle of mine as well was honesty, not from the perspective of the fact that I was a compulsive liar or anything, but because I didn't want to let my parents down. And so there was a lot of times growing up that in my head, it would make more sense to omit information or to make up a story rather than just tell them what I wanted to do.
Yeah, I get
Yeah.
that for sure. I'm interested in this shyness now because, now you're a performer on stage in front of tens of thousands, and, obviously you got over it somewhere. How did you work on that issue? Because, there's a lot of adult men that may be watching that, are still feeling some level of shyness.
I think again, it came back to just understanding that no one can be me. So I became a lot more comfortable in my own skin. So rather than feeling like I had to prove myself or I had to be something that I wasn't, as I it's probably once I hit my 30s, I started getting into my 30s, and I started unpacking a lot of the things that I was fearful of, and a lot of the things that I was fearful of growing up actually happened. So it's regardless of whether me being afraid of them or not, they still happened. I got beat up a bit, like in scouts and stuff, and I'd get, anxious about that, but it still happened, regardless of whether I was afraid of it or not. I did get divorced, which is, something that I didn't foresee. But me being afraid of that didn't stop it from happening. Like losing a job, or losing a friendship. You see relationships break down, you can kind of see the writing on the wall, and then a fear would come up inside of, oh, I hope this doesn't end. But none of that stopped any of that, and it's been a process, I think, through my 30s, and it's still a process, I mean, throughout your entire life, but I think of becoming more comfortable in my own skin and being aware of the fact that I do whatever it is that I do in the same way that you do whatever it is that you do, and you fill a space that only you can fill. And if you're not there, nobody else can fill that specific space. There are certain roles that other people may be able to play, but nobody is going to play them in the same way that you do. Nobody is going to be able to do exactly what it is that you do. So there is no competition between anybody except for you and you. That's where the true competition lies, is becoming the best that you can be. And I think when you understand that, it does take away some shyness, because you start to understand, you stop feeling the pressure of trying to speak when you have nothing to say, or being scared of what other people may think of you. Because a great quote from Anthony Hopkins is, what other people think of me is none of my business.
Yeah, I love that. So true. And I can relate to a lot of that as well. Um, I love this where you were saying that you were raised in a around a small church in religion, and you brought that up earlier when we first had our introduction. Are you still religious now?
Interesting question, because I don't think of myself as religious, but for, I guess, the non-religious, they would probably say that I am religious. I I believe in a creator that that created everything. I believe in a power that is beyond the universe, that has set things in motion, and that is actively involved in the vibration that we are. But I think from in my head, and this, I guess, comes down to semantics maybe, or the attachments that we have to certain words. When I think of religion, I think of a set of rules and regulations. And I was actually a pastor for a little while in LA. And I got fired for spending too much time with the community. which caused me to question a lot of things. And I realized that my I guess issues or disagreements always happened with people. They weren't necessarily with God. They were there's things that I don't understand about the creator, but at the same time, I think if I could understand everything, then it wouldn't be the creator. You know what I mean? But there's a little catchphrase that I used to use when I was a pastor, and I used to say, religion often gets in the way of God. Because you can become so married to the way that you are used to doing things that it can become like a social club or a community, which is fine. But in my experience, God does whatever he wants to do. And there's people that you would think are not at all, you know, good people, but then they can say something and they can help you on your journey, you know. And there are people that could be very devout Christians and make a statement that could really harm as well. And ultimately, we're all human. And for me, and I can only speak for myself, but to answer that question, am I religious? It depends on who you ask.
I guess it's the differentiation between religion and spirituality, and I would call religion mainstream religion, as in, you know, following the dogma, and it just sounds from how you've been talking about it, that you sort of found your own version of what works for you within that framework. Would that be right?
Um, yes, I would also say that I don't believe in the idea of your truth and my truth. I believe that there has to be an ultimate standard. But I believe in your perspective and my perspective, and you can only ever see from your own perspective. So I do believe that 1+1 will always equal 2. Doesn't matter how, you know, how much you think that it doesn't, or it does, whatever. That actually doesn't impact the fact that you have one apple, you have another apple together, that makes 2 apples. I believe there is ultimate truth, and there has to be ultimate truth, because if there's not ultimate truth, if truth is relative, then it will be constantly moving. You will always be better at some things than some people. You'll always be further along the line than some people, and not quite as far as other people. You will always be, you know, there will be things that you'll be more disciplined in than some people and less disciplined than other people. And if your standard is those around you, then that standard will wax and wane. Whereas if there is an ultimate standard, which I believe that there is, I believe that there is true perfection, and I don't know if I'll ever reach that. I would like to. I don't think I will, but that's what I'm aiming for, and I'm measuring myself against that standard, and rather than measuring myself against other people. I'm a better husband than some, but I'm a worse husband than others. I'm a better father than some. I'm a worse father than others. I'm a better human than some and a worse human than others. But again, coming back to your only competition is yourself. The standard that I have for myself is that definition of love that is in the Bible. Love is patient, love is kind, love keeps no record of wrongs. You know, even people that are not religious, they will use that scripture when they're getting married, because it is such a beautiful description of what love is. Love is about genuinely seeking what is best for whoever it is that you are loving. And sometimes, you know, I'm a parent. Sometimes that means letting somebody figure something out for themselves, and sometimes it means jumping in and giving a hand. You know, sometimes it means going over something just that one more time, even though it seems like it's so simple and the person is not getting it. but just letting go of the preconceived ideas before. It's and that's what my tattoo comes back to, is trying to remind myself, because it doesn't matter how much you say these words, when you get put in the thick of it, you're tired, you're under the pump, a situation comes up. It's really easy for words to come out of your mouth that are not loving, that are not kind, that are not patient. It's really easy to bring up something that has hurt you in the past that you haven't fully dealt with. I'm starting to ramble now.
It's great. I love it. No, do ramble on. You're fine. Whatever needs to come out will come out for your episode. How old were you when you got that first tattoo on your heart?
I would have been 24, I reckon. 23 or 24.
Yeah, that's profound, isn't it? May I ask what religion you were pastor for?
It was the Church of Christ, non-denominational. So it's kind of, if somebody is watching and they're familiar with church denominations, it's from the Reformation movement, which was born as so not the Catholic Church, but more like, I guess, Baptists or that sort of angle. That I was specifically brought in to deal with the youth in inner city LA, to deal with bridging the gap between some of the socioeconomic members of the community there in the church, because where I was at the time, I was in LA doing acting, but I'd gone to Bible college, and I was helping out a youth camp in the area, and their youth pastor had left, but they didn't have the finances to bring on just a youth pastor. So I was wearing a couple of different hats, and my university degree is in human communication, so they thought that might help with that specific area, because that area had a very unique problem in that back in the 70s, it was far enough out. It was at the foothills of some mountains in sort of South Los Angeles County, North Orange County, and rich Caucasian people had moved out there in the 70s and built these big mansions. Through the 80s and 90s, what happened was primarily Hispanic and African Americans that had gotten out of jail but wanted to clean up their life. They were trying to move out of inner city LA, but they couldn't afford to. So they would move to the suburb that was next to it. And then as they grew up and they got a bit more finances, then they'd try and move a little bit further out. Now, what had happened by the time I got there, which was the early 2000s, was the area that a lot of rich Caucasians had built mansions in back in the 70s. Now that land was devalued because of the people that had moved into the area. So you had a really odd mix of people in their 60s and 70s. Generally speaking, it was Caucasians that were trapped there because what they could sell their house now for, they couldn't move anywhere they wanted to move. So they just stayed. And then you had 60 and 70-year-old Hispanics and African Americans that were so grateful to be there because they had gotten out of generational crime. They'd gotten out of prison, and they had worked so hard to get their family out of those neighborhoods where they were surrounded by violence and crime. So you had a bit of a feeling of resentment, I guess, from one side, and then also a feeling of gratitude from the other side. Now the kids all grew up together, and they had, they lived on the same streets as each other and everything like that. So it was the generation before and the generation before that. So there's this really odd mix of races and cultures and ages and status, I guess, that I'd kind of been brought in to help out with. And I remember one instance. There was a kid in my youth group who said, "I think my dad's using again," and he'd gone to prison 20 years before for trafficking drugs. And so I said, "Well," I said, "what makes you think that?" One thing led to another. I said, "Yeah, okay, well, I'll come over and I'll just have a chat with your dad." So his dad was 61, maybe, quite a large Mexican dude. And he'd come across, he'd been he had been drug trafficking from Mexico to the US years previously, and he'd gotten caught in the US, went to jail in the US, got out and got his family out, but he was kind of getting back into it years later. So I went over, I lined up to go over and have dinner with the family and everything. And after dinner, I went into the living room, and the family had kind of was in the other room. And so I took an opportunity just to say, "I know this is really hard to hear," I said, "but I'm not accusing you of anything, but I just wanted to know if you're slipping back into old habits, because I care about you." Next thing I know, he grabbed me by the front of the shirt and throw me up against the wall and pulled out a pistol and stuck it in my eye and said, "Don't you tell me what to do in my house." And these were not my words. These were directly from God, because I don't think I would have the balls to say this, but I put my hands in the air and I was off the ground with a pistol in my eye. And I said, "Mate, I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but I love you. And if that's what you're doing, then it's not going to lead your family where you want your family to go." And it felt like an eternity. And then he just let me go. He said, "Get out." And I said, "Yes, sir." And about 4 or 5 months later, I was holding a prayer group, and I heard the door open. We all had our heads bowed, and I heard the door open, and someone walk in. And when we raised our heads, that was him, and he just gave me a big hug, and that was all. He didn't say anything, but he just gave me a big hug, and then as he started to leave, he said, "Thank you." And that's, ultimately, you talk about religion and God, spirituality. I do believe there are good spirits and there are bad spirits, and I think ultimately that I believe the Creator is perfect love, and that's what the Creator is, and our work here on earth is to choose that, and to do our best to help those around us and those that come into our path to choose that, because love has to be chosen. You can't force love on anybody, but you can assist, you can guide, but you can't force love. You have to give an opportunity for love to be chosen and to be accepted.
Yeah, so good. Thanks for that, Dell. Great story. Wow. What would you say? Because a lot of men, especially, in America, it seems like you spent quite a bit of time in America. I'd say compared to Australia, they appear to be much more dogmented, is that the word, in their religion. And a lot of men, let's say, are coming to the realization that maybe there is a control aspect to it, and they're wanting to have the connection to the divinity and the Creator. And they're a bit worried now about stepping into the freedom of being able to maybe connect directly and find their own comfort zone around religion, spirituality. What would you say to those men?
I would bring it back to Jesus Christ. I mean, at the time, there were so many people that thought he was going to be this political leader and rise up and overthrow the Romans, and he just did him. He did what he believed he was here to do. And we, as humans, and I think, I was going to say as men, but I do think that it goes across genders. Um, it is within us where we want to control, um, in both a good way and a bad way. You want to control your finances, so that you don't run out. You want to control, um, your relationships to the point where, you want it to be a good relationship. So there are things that are in your control and outside of your control. But the idea of surrender is something that is so hard, understanding that, people talk about job security. What at any moment, doesn't matter what job you're in, you could get let go. At any moment, your car could break down. You know, at any moment, somebody could swerve off the road. And hit you or someone that you love. At any moment, you don't have control over any of that. And the choice in life lies whether you focus on the fact that you don't have control and trying to control more, or whether you surrender to the fact that you are here right now. There's breath in your lungs. I didn't cause the sun to rise. I didn't plant any of these trees. I didn't do any of that. But what I did do is I did choose to get out of bed this morning. And I did choose to say yes to this interview. And I did choose to come up on this hill. Those are things that I chose to do. And I think if you can separate the choice and control and put it in the sphere of love rather than the sphere of fear, rather than the spirit of lack of, oh, well, I need to control this because what if they don't understand? You know what? They're on their own journey. You don't have to control that. You control yourself and get better at controlling yourself. And as you get better at controlling yourself, then your interactions will become better. And I think that you will start to see things more clearly as you start to understand yourself more, and you start to understand where your own wounds lie, where your own habits lie, where your own addictions lie. We all have habits that we like and dislike, and we all have addictions. And when I say addiction, I mean, it could be something as simple as having a coffee in the morning. I went through a period where I was drinking a lot of coffee, and I thought, oh, I'd wake up and I'd have a coffee straight away. And so then I stopped. I thought, you know what? I don't want it to be a case of I have to have it. So then I quite enjoy my coffee, but now my rule is I'm like, well, I have to be up. Unless I'm on a long drive and I really have to drive, I have to be up for an hour or two before I have my coffee, so that I can learn the skill of operating without coffee, because otherwise it is an addiction, right? And an addiction is a habit that you do unconsciously, and the habit is fully self-serving, I believe.
Yeah, great insights. Thank you, Dell. Let's get into your adulthood, your deepest, darkest rock bottom moment. Would you like to share what was happening and where were you? What was going on?
I would. Can you pause for just one moment? I have to run grab a charger because I just saw my battery is low.
We're back.
Rock bottom. I would say there's two moments. So I have been divorced twice. My first one was very young. I would have been about 23. And I remember I'd only been married a year. And it was one of those moments where I did feel like I didn't want to be here anymore. But I hadn't reconciled that in my head. And I remember I remember going and buying a bottle of vodka and just drinking it and going for a wander. And in the back of my mind, I kind of hoped that I just would pass out on a road or something like that. I never really fully vocalized that, but I think that was definitely in the back of my mind. And I remember thinking, if I can get through this, then there's obviously a purpose for my life. And I remember waking up. This was in the US. I was in university, and I woke up on my back in the middle of a road, and the sun, was on my face, and it's probably 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And I remember just thinking, well, I did it. I woke up. So let's go. And that was the first that was my rock bottom moment until I went through my last divorce. My last divorce, I had 2 kids in my second marriage, and I see them quite regularly now, but at the beginning it was quite a volatile split, and I wasn't really seeing the kids much. And I remember having repetitive thoughts of not wanting to be here. And I remember thinking, okay, I've had these thoughts, and they have ended up being quite repetitive. And if I don't do something about it, then they are going to become habitual thoughts. And at the time, so I tore my Achilles, went through a divorce, and broke up with my band all within like a 3-month period. And so this was all in the US. Well, I was on tour in the US. So I came back home, had nowhere to live, was in a moon boot, and no job, I couldn't do anything. So there's a lot of time for that to kind of stew, if you will. And it was just one of those tours that just everything went wrong. I lost a lot of money on that tour. And I remember thinking, I just need to walk. I just need to actually feel these emotions and work through them, because if I just stick them in the closet, eventually they're going to bust out, and I may not know when they're going to bust out. And so I put on music as I was walking. I was in my moon boot, so I'm kind of like hobbling along, and I just went for a walk. I was in Victoria at the time, and I walked down to Altona on the western side of Melbourne, and I ended up walking all the way to Werribee, which is like 13 or 14 Ks. I walked overnight. And my idea was I just wanted to walk through everything. So I put on music on my headphones that I knew would make me angry, because I wanted to feel the anger. And then I put on music that I knew would make me sad. And I just sat in front of the beach. I found a spot on my own and just cried and just let it out. And then I was just so tired, And this was I'd probably only been, out for maybe 3 or 4 hours. I'll go back a little bit. The catalyst for this was I wasn't seeing the kids, and I'd just gotten denied for Centrelink because I had torn my Achilles like when I was overseas. So they said it was a pre-existing injury. So I was like, okay, I have 0 income. I've got debt now from a tour that lost money, and I'm like crashing on a mate's couch in a moon boot. Like, what am I going to do? So yeah, I so tired about probably like 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And so I crawled into this like little thicket in this like park. And I was like, I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to sleep. And then I'll continue walking in the morning. And I saw this pair of eyes looking at me. And I was like, oh, hope it's not like a dingo or something. And it turns out it was a fox, And I was like, man, it probably smells I'm injured. I had all these thoughts going through my head. I was like, that's the last thing I want to deal with, is a fox trying to like bite me or something. So I got up and I moved. I moved to another thicket, and the fox followed me. And I moved to another thicket, and the fox followed me again. And finally I was like, yeah, fine. So I walked. This is middle of the night. I walked all the way to the other side of the park. the fox followed me about a stone's throw away, and I'd throw things at it and it'd scurry off, and I'd come back. And I walked all the way to the edge of the park, and then as soon as I got outside of the park, the fox just stopped and stared at me and then I kept walking out, and it's just staring at me. It didn't turn around and leave. And believe what you will in that sphere, but that was what I needed to just push me just that little bit more, because I'd made the commitment to myself that I was going to work through everything. And I got tired, and I allowed myself to go back on my initial word to myself, which is what I knew I needed to do. I needed to work through it, but I got tired and I chickened out. And I wrote a song about that as well, and it's called Lady Undertaker. And it's on my current album as well, shameless plug. But the lyric goes, Lady Undertaker, I'll dance with you for now until the sky is broken and the shadows fall somehow. But then I'll have to leave you as the night begins to fade, for my time is not yet over and my cards are not all played. And the song tells a story essentially of death being portrayed as a lady undertaker. And in the character in the story, he plays cards with her, and then he decides he's not going to go all the way to where he loses all his chips. He's just going to bow out. And then he dances with her, but every single time he says, yeah, I'm here, but I'm not going to stay here, because if I stay here, I know exactly where that leads. And in my life, I hope I'm never there again. But I definitely built some muscle during that time that was built upon my previous rock bottom. And I'm 41 years old now. And one of the things that I love about growing older is if your eyes are open, you can actually see all the times you made it. Because when you're younger, you think, oh man, this is so hard. How am I ever going to do this? But if your eyes are open, you get to a point where you go, well, I thought I wasn't going to make it, but I did. And then there was that other time that I thought I wasn't going to get it all done, but I did. And there was that other time that I thought the world was going to end, but it didn't. And there was that other time that I thought I wasn't going to make it, but I did. And it gives you confidence, I think, to know that no matter what the future holds, and I may hit a rock bottom that's even worse. Who knows? I hope I don't, but I might. But I'd like to think that if I do, I can draw on those past experiences, and I can be even more conscious there, because times of pain, I find, are when you learn the most. They can be. And I think if we don't learn what we need to learn in times of pain, then often they come around again in a different way.
Yeah, so true. Thanks for sharing that, Dell. I'm going to move on because I know you've got limited time, and I want to get into creativity and the music industry and poetry, and still got lots of things left I want to discuss with you. But I want to talk about masculinity, but we can relate it to the music industry. Like, what's going on there? Our young kids are being let's say thrown a narrative that transgender narrative. Is there a push that are you feeling any pressure to change anything that you don't innately and creatively want to do, or are you fully able to express yourself and your masculinity or femininity any way that you want to?
Interesting question, because I personally don't feel any pressure, but for quite a while now, I've kind of taken the stance that I'd do what I do, and I, if there's an area I can improve in, then I do that, or I look at that. I've probably gotten a little bit more tactful as I've gotten older, but I think if I felt like there was a push for me to do that, I I don't think I would feel pressure to, because I mean, in my experience, there's always pressure in, especially rock and roll. You know, you've got to do the drugs and you got to have the women and you got to do all that, and that's always there. And people say you have to, but it's, for me, I've always gone about it from the angle of, well, that's not why I'm here. I don't want to sleep around and I don't want to do all the drugs. Like, if doing drugs is just about having the money to do drugs, and you know, if you want to sleep around, then there's plenty of opportunity for you to do that as well. Like, I could do those things without being in music if I wanted to, but I don't want to. I want to play music on stage. And yes, I enjoy a good time, but I don't see, those are not things that I see as having a good time. So I think, bringing it back to what you're asking, I think I have in myself built, I guess you could call it defenses, or boundaries, if you will, to where um, just because something is pushed or seen as accepted doesn't necessarily mean that that's what I'm going to do. I do, having said that, I do think that it is getting harder to openly express opinions through art that are not, I'm choosing my words carefully here, that are not necessarily government approved. I do think that it does get a little bit harder um, to do that these days, and that might sound kind of controversial, but with in the same way that you can use hashtags, you know, to try and get your, with social media, to get whatever it is that you're promoting out there. There are also algorithms that can look for certain words or certain themes and bury those. And there's plenty of evidence of that happening. So in my experience, and it's only my experience, I do think that as artists, there's kind of two routes that you can go about. You can either say, I'm going to continue saying point blank whatever it is that I want to say, and if it's censored, it's censored. If it's not, it's not. Or you can kind of go down sort of the I guess the 70s and 80s model of the double entendre. You know, back in the 70s and 80s, double entendre was always generally about sexual things, but you can you can use imagery and you can use simile and metaphor to get across whatever message you want. Which I'm a glass half full sort of person. So while I think a push within the industry is frustrating, because I think that art should be creativity, I don't think that there should be, whether I agree with you or not, I think you should be free to express yourself, because we're equals. That's what I believe. So I don't believe that there should be censorship in art. I think that there are certain boundaries, maybe that, like, I mean, that brings up a whole nother topic. I mean, should you be allowed to create art around cannibalism, for instance, you know, or you're like, but I do think by and large you should be allowed to express yourself through art, and that should not be controlled by any one entity. But the flip side of that is, because art at its core is, or should be, free, just like water, if you put up a wall to water, it finds a way around it. It's gonna, a stream will divert into two, and then you dam those up, and then it'll divert into four, and the streams they'll be in different directions. They might be skinnier at some points and larger at other points, but there's always I think there's always a way to express yourself. In some of my favorite pieces of literature are social commentaries, that you kind of look back. I mean, you think of like Gulliver's Travels, for instance, that's a whole piece of fiction that has been created based on the author's view of the all the stuff that's going on in that time period, that he's living in. And I think we have an opportunity as artists now to be not vague, but be very conscious in who we are and what we want to be putting out there, and very intentional about choosing our words and choosing our notes and choosing our colors. And that could take many forms. You could say, I'm going to sit down and map everything out, or you could get into your heart and just allow that to come out and look at what that is in a non-specific linear way. I'm getting very arty-farty.
No, well, I mean, of course, you probably know I'm a poet, and I always say I write from the heart. So this is right up my alley, and I'd just like to expand on this, the heart and poetry. So when did you start writing poetry, and where do you think poetry comes from?
That's a good question. I've probably been writing poetry. I can't remember when I started. It's probably, it would have been childhood, because the beautiful thing about homeschooling is you can get done the work that you're meant to get done to keep up with government standards generally a lot quicker than you can in a classroom. So there was a lot of time there that I could look at other aspects or ventures that I enjoyed. I couldn't tell you when I first started writing, but I know I definitely was writing in high school. I feel like I was writing before that. More seriously, though, like probably the last 10, 15 years, I've had people say that, I used to have a blog back in the blogging days. And it was through the lockdowns and everything that I decided to finally collate. Actually, no, it was before that. You know what? It was, I finally collated my poems when I was sort of going through that dark time that I spoke about earlier. That was around the time that I really decided to go ahead and just collate everything. And I put together my first poetry book, which was called Red Threads. And that was kind of, and I got it illustrated by an incredible artist called Sophie Banks out of WA. I've never met her. I just saw her art online, and I said, "Hey, I'd love to buy this piece off you for my book." And she was like, "Oh, I'll create you another one." I was like, "Oh, cool. Would you like to create some more?" Where does poetry come from? I think poetry for me is putting boundaries on the limitless. It is changing the forms of constants in a way that nothing else can. And when I say that, we know that some liquids will turn to solids, and some things that are hard will turn soft. But I think poetry has a way of taking a color and making it a number, or taking something that's solid and making it a smell, or turning something that's visual into something audible. And it does that, I believe, through the rhythm of it, because you lined in, and music does this as well, but music has you can't just read music. I mean, you can, but like music, playing music has the audio aspect, whereas poetry, and other pieces of literature as well, but specifically poetry, there's a rhythm there. So you get locked into the rhythm, and once you're locked into the rhythm of the poem, whatever the meter is, that puts you on this path, and it takes you wherever it's going to take you. Some people have an idea of what they're going to write about. For me, I jokingly say poems just kind of pop out. Like I'll get like a line or a phrase, and I'll start writing, and then I stop. And sometimes it's like literally 2 lines. I'm like, oh, and I try and craft and create the rest of it, and then I'm like, nah, that's all it was. Okay, fine. And there's other times, it all might come out in like 10 minutes and then it's done. Sometimes it all comes out and then I'm like, oh, that one line doesn't fit. I need to change that one line. Or I kind of moved out. There's an old guitarist of mine used to say about writing music. He used to say, when the muse visits, you never know how long they're going to stay. So you always invite them in. And I think for me, it's the same with poetry. That idea of the muse or the inspiration. I've thought about trying to, control it a little bit more, but I kind of like the fact that it happens when it happens, and you can put yourself in a space that is conducive to writing, but you can't force anything out. I wrote, my second book is done. It's just waiting for publishing. We've been looking for publishers for a while, and it's called Hopium. And that was written during the whole lockdown period. And I wrote all those poems and probably read threads. The majority of, there's probably, 100 or 150 poems in between those 2 books. And most of those were written in like a 2-3 year period. Outside of that, I've got, ones that are sitting around in parts and pieces. I haven't really put pen to paper for a little while. I feel like I should, but I haven't. I've been busy with, I guess, other stuff and not allowed myself to get there. But it's a very long-winded way of saying I don't know where it comes from.
I just say it just sounds exactly like how my poetry comes through. I love it. So I just always makes me happy talking about poetry. And I have invited you to read a couple of pieces if you've got your book there. So what have you chosen for us?
I have chosen Who Are You? Who are you when you dare to step beyond this conditioned stare? What lies beneath lies inside. Some lie to hide, some lie to fight. Soul's murky depth invites us in, to swim amongst, to swim and grin. Hold yourself while you can to a goal, to a plan. Fill the gap, become more whole. Rhythmic seasons, alchemic coal. What is right, what is left when battle scars finally take control? Build it up, don't tear it down. A lifetime to grow, one moment to drown. Sometimes here is really there. Tell me, darling, do you still care? For pretty things and simple treasures, or have you moved on to more exotic pleasures? Burning desire, simple brilliance, body in motion, lips kissed on a precipice. Would you awaken with no promise given? Would you stay sleeping if dreams kept you swimming? Hold on to this last exploratory thought. Our lives are but love drops falling till caught.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dell. Love it, love it. I'll have to check out your books for sure. You've got one, and when the other one comes out. Which ones, how do you decide which ones get music put to them? You know, you've got your poetry and you've got your songwriting and music. How do you decide? Or do they decide for you, the words and the music?
Yeah, I feel like they kind of decide because sometimes, I mean, I generally write songs independently, like lyrics independently of my poems. But sometimes I'm searching for a specific something. So I might have started some lyrics and I can't find what I need. And when I do that, I go to my old lyric books and my old poems that are all just bits and pieces that didn't fully, there was a cool line here or a cool line there, but it didn't fully make it. And if I can't find anything there, then I will open up the poetry book and I'll just kind of read through until something just strikes. And it's like, oh, that that bit there. Lady Undertaker, that was a poem. It was, and it's turned into like a almost a 7-minute song. It's this rambling, like epic thing. But that was written as a poem. And then I set the music to the poem.
Yeah,
But it's pretty rare that I do that.
yeah, love it, love it. Now I know you're limited for time. How much time have we got, Dell?
Well, I don't. What? Let's see. What's the time? Looking at. Yeah, probably 3-4 minutes.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, okay. So tell people where they can find you. What are you up to? I know you're doing a huge national tour. You've got America coming up. Go for it. And then I'll ask you to deliver a final message for men. So however long you've got.
Okay. Well, my original music is all at dellacoma.com. Dellacoma, Dellacoma. I've got 2 albums and a couple of singles on there, and music videos and tour dates. And we'll be going back over to the US for the first time in 5 years, later in the year. I'm touring Australia at the moment, every state and territory with the Australian INXS Show, which is what you saw me perform with.
Yeah.
Um, and then on Facebook, I also have an artist page, which is Dellacóma Rio, and that's kind of me just talking about everything that I do, whether it's acting or poetry or the INXS Show or my original work. I just kind of, that's all lumped together on that page. Some people only like my original stuff, some people only like the INXS stuff, and some people just follow whatever it is that I do. So yeah.
Okay, we'll put all those links in underneath. What's your favorite INXS song?
People ask me that all the time. It's I have the unique perspective of, for me, it's all about the performance, because that's what I do, is perform them live. And Never Tear Us Apart is, I mean, it sounds cheesy, but that's, we always do that as a eulogy to Michael. And sometimes the hairs on my arms stand up on end, you know, and there's a certain energy in the room once you start talking about what he meant to people and unlocking people's memories of him and that music. So playing that song and hearing the audience sing back and feeling the energy, and you can feel people remembering in that song. So that's probably my favorite.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I grew up in the 80s with INXS. I saw them when they were touring the clubs back in the day. I was underage, but then it was easy, just photocopy your license, getting someone's license, change the name. So, you know, very grateful that I saw them live and grew up on their music. And I have seen you live, and it's brilliant. I had the best night. So thank you so much for that. And let's talk to, what's your final message to men, Dell, men that are maybe going through that tough time? What can you say to them?
I would say being strong doesn't mean you've got it all figured out. Um, I would say that often you can't go around it, you got to go through it. I would say don't be afraid to surrender. And I would also say don't be afraid to stand up for what you know is right. Um, in today's world, we're fed a lot about toxic masculinity. And that is true. There is a lot of toxic masculinity, but masculinity itself is not toxic. And it takes a very strong person to be able to admit that they're struggling. So don't see it as a sign of weakness to admit when you're struggling, and pick up the phone. Don't be afraid to say I love you. Don't be afraid to say I need help, because chances are the person that you're reaching out to, if they haven't been there, they want to help you get through it. And if the person that you were reaching out to doesn't want to help you get through it, then find a new circle, because you can't do something for somebody else, but I fully believe that you end up becoming the sum total of the people you surround yourself with. And if you are surrounded with people who are not actively pouring love into your cup, but you are actively pouring love into their cup, your love cup will empty very fast. And it can feel very isolating when you're going through anything, but nothing new is under the sun. And the older I get, the more I feel like we've all been somewhere close to where you've been.
So good. Thank you so much, Dell. I've loved this conversation. So, you've got such a beautiful insight and awareness, and I love how, you've related it to everything that's brought you to this moment, and, to see ultimately the gratitude and the love in it all. So thank you very much from my heart to yours.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor.
Thanks, everyone. If you could like, share, subscribe, be sure to check out Dell on his Australian tour, and later this year in the States. Follow his page so you know all the dates. You won't be disappointed. So thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Dell, do you just hang on a moment? Thanks.